So what is Darkstalker, why is it unconventional, and why is it worth studying? So Darkstalker is a standalone prequel from the Wings of Fire series, which is a YA fantasy about anthropomorphized dragons set in a land called Pyria. It's written by Toy T. Sutherland, who's an American author born in Venezuela, and the book was released June 28, 2016. This book's an unconventional choice for the canon because it's high fantasy, aimed at a younger audience, has animal characters, and is part of a lengthy series. However, there are many reasons that I believe it should be studied. It has a complex exploration of themes surrounding the nature of evil and villainy, cleverly using narrative perspective to explore this and manipulate the reader. Also, although it doesn't have explicit social commentary and isn't tied to a certain movement, through fantasy it explores relevant social issues, and it does so in a way that's complex but also more accessible than a lot of texts in the canon. As a modern text, there are more open-minded discussions about faith, war ethics, neurodivergency, and the mentality of a villain. A lot happens in this book, and I tried to write a more in-depth summary, but it was way too long, so I've attempted to briefly explain the book. During a war set between the Icewing and the Nightwing tribes caused by a politicized marriage of his parents Foeslayer and Artix, Darkstalker is born into a broken family with immense power, animus magic, future sight, and mind reading. Clearsight, Darkstalker's destined soulmate with overwhelmingly strong future sight, and Fathom, an animus sea-wing prince who fears his power after his family was massacred at the hands of his animus grandfather, both tried to steer Darkstalker away from a future of corruption and evil. Darkstalker becomes more and more powerful and corrupted, and they ultimately fail to save him and have to banish him to eternal slumber. I'm also going to explain a few of the key terms, such as tribes, which are nation-states separated by subspecies, with different traits and cultures, i.e. the sea wings are aquatic and the ice wings are arctic. Intertribal relationships are generally shunned upon. Furthermore, animus magic is the power to enchant anything to do anything. It's inherited genetically and it's politicized because only certain tribes have it, and each tribe have different rules surrounding it. Then the 3 moon powers for the Nightwings, depending on how many moons they're born under, determines whether they get no powers, have mind-reading powers, can see the future, or both. And then the tribes have a monarchy system. They're led by a queen. The throne is passed down if a female relative kills the queen in a duel, and male royalty cannot rule, but they have special privileges. So the first social theme I'm going to discuss is familial dynamics. Throughout the novel, Sutherland explores the effects broken family dynamics can have on children. Darkstalker's parents have a toxic relationship and originate from toxic upbringings themselves, and Darkstalker's relationship with Clearsight begins to parallel this. Both couples begin dangerously hopeful, with Darkstalker in particular having a fixation on creating the perfect family with the kids he and Clearsight sees in their future, both of the characters treating their kids as if they're already alive. However, in both couples, the fundamentally different upbringings between the partners causes their relationships to become unhealthy, largely due to the male partner's toxicity. Sutherland has stated Darkstalker was based off of an ex of hers from an unhealthy relationship she was in, and this is reflected in his dialogue such as, "Why can't you trust me, or you're going to learn to like it?" which resembles manipulative and abusive partners. The cyclical structure and use of narrative parallels comments on the importance of a stable family and how childhood upbringings in the real world can affect the child's perception of love and family. Moreover, Darkstalker's heavy preference towards his mother, despite both parents' toxic qualities, models the way children caught in between broken marriages or divorces often take the side of one parent and villainize the other. The warm, loving tone in Darkstalker's narration the first time he sees his mother contrasts the judgmental and aggressive tone the first time seeing his father, which immediately establishes this divide. In conjunction to this theme, Sutherland explores neurodivergency and its effect on families through Darkstalker's sister Whiteout, who has associative synesthesia and is autistic coded because she has a special interest in art, less receptive to social cues, gets sensory overload frequently, and has a comfort object. However, instead of placing the blame on her neurodivergency, Sutherland critiques the people who try to fix her through Artix, because he sees Whiteout's weirdness as a burden and at one point tries to use his magic to make her to be normal, which is portrayed as despicable. Unlike many of the texts and literary canons, this exploration is accurate and sensitive, which makes it a worthwhile text for studying this topic. Sutherland also makes commentary on many current political issues through the theme of societal conflict and ethics of war. Firstly, as tribes can represent both different races and nations, prejudice is explored with complexity. The tribes instinctively look down upon each other and see their cultures as superior, and during the war this escalates to considerations of genocide. This can represent both institutionalized racism as well as xenophobia, or in America, particularly islamophobia, fostered by war and conflict. Furthermore, the rift Trump's campaign caused in 2015 and 2016 is reflected by the different tribes' deep-rooted hatred of each other. Furthermore, Darkstalker's performative, manipulative showmanship, such as when he tells his father Artix to take his talons, rip open his stomach, and show everyone what he's really like, reflects Trump's history as a TV personality. Furthermore, Darkstalker literally creates a border wall that will kill any Icewings who pass, which is similar to Trump's idea of a border wall. Also, the way that the fear of animus magic is used in the war as a bargaining chip reflects the nature of nuclear warfare, particularly the conflict between North Korea and the USA at the time the book was written. The USA's involvement in Middle Eastern conflicts is also criticised throughout the book. Graphic imagery used when describing the war criticizes American violence on foreign soil. And furthermore, in the war, only Nightwing soldiers are in danger, while the Icewing civilians, including their children, are threatened, which critiques how US soldiers are the only people in danger versus the everyday civilians in the war zones. Furthermore, it's mentioned that the tribes pay the Sandwing Queen to use her territory as a battleground. The use of sand territory not only evokes stereotypical imagery of the Middle East and reflects the way the US gets involved in conflicts and commits atrocities away from their home soil, but the fact they're paying her critiques these capitalist power structures and the way money is valued over lives and traded for complacency in war. Finally, Darkstalker has a knife that periodically kills Icewings and leaves messages carved near the body warning that the Darkstalker is coming for all of them, and this evokes imagery of terrorism. Furthermore, the fear of the other and the defensive attack-first mentality caused by 9/11 is reflected in the Nightwing-Icewing conflict. Furthermore, through the Seawing Royal Massacre, Sutherland explores domestic terrorism and mass shootings and PTSD, which have been a massive social issue in 21st century America. The use of child characters particularly evokes imagery of school shootings. For example, a character sliced herself up with glass and pretended to be dead, which resembles the way survivors of school shootings recall pretending they have been shot to survive. Furthermore, in this situation, Albatross models the shooter, as his motive comes from stress and other mental health issues fostered by his childhood trauma, particularly abuse from his sisters. And furthermore, like mass shooting victims, he has a personal relationship with his targets. The effects of this are explored differently for each surviving character. Fathom becomes self-loathing and anxious with survivor's guilt, his best friend Indigo becomes overprotective and suspicious, and his sister Pearl becomes an overcautious and restrictive queen as the only surviving heir of the incident. And this represents the life-altering effects of surviving shootings and the PTSD that comes with this. Outside of specific social commentary, Darkstalker's main theme is the nature of evil, and it challenges the reader to change their perception of evil. Sutherland shows both the sympathetic side and the undeniably villainous side of Darkstalker, letting the reader come to their own conclusion to the extent of his villainy. For example, when Fathom's reading his spells, Sutherland states that he made certain enchantments to keep his family and friends happy, such as a bell that would ring to let Darkstalker know whenever Fathom was feeling sad or lonely, but this then contrasts pages later with the violent, cruel spells, like nightmares to haunt the Icewing Queen with all the ways he planned to kill her. Even from the character's name alone, Darkstalker's evil is ambiguous. His mother names him Darkstalker because the darkness is his prey and he chases it back like a hero, while his father says it sounds more like he creeps through the dark like a stalker. The nature of evil is further explored through Sutherland's complex use of narrative perspective. She uses third-person limited perspective that switches mainly between Darkstalker, Fathom, and Clearsight. Whichever character's perspective we read from alters our perception of Darkstalker's actions and successfully makes us question the nature of evil. For example, when Darkstalker hides his spells from Clearsight, from his perspective he's doing it to keep them both happy. But from Clearsight's perspective, we see how fearful this makes her, the fact he's been lying to her. Moreover, when Darkstalker enchants Arctic to obey his every command, he sees this as an act of heroism to save his sister and friends, but Fathom sees this as a point of no return on Darkstalker's journey to evil. Furthermore, when characters are manipulated to think a certain way, their perspective changes and the reader is manipulated alongside them. For example, Clearsight's perspective becomes less anxious, so the reader thinks Darkstalker is less evil, but then we eventually learn he hid the bad futures from her with an enchantment and thus from the reader. Furthermore, the perspective Sutherland decides not to give us is also significant. Firstly, Fathom's friend Indigo isn't given perspective until the epilogue, which reflects her powerlessness and how Darkstalker robbed her of her viewpoints and suppressed her involvement by enchanting her. Moreover, the prologue is from Artix's perspectives, where his interactions with and thoughts about Foeslayer paint him extremely sympathetically. However, we then only ever see him again through Darkstalker's eyes, where the biased narration forces the reader to see Arctic in the same way Darkstalker does, leaving how evil and how much Arctic is actually to blame really ambiguous. The nature of evil is also explored through the theme of fate versus free will. With the unparalleled power Darkstalker is born with, Sutherland suggests he was perhaps destined to abuse it due to the idea of absolute power corrupting absolutely. Furthermore, biologically his sister should have been born at the same time as him, but wasn't, so she didn't receive the same power, which implies Darkstalker's downfall is fated by the circumstances of his birth. However, this is challenged when it's revealed Darkstalker made the conscious decision not to let Whiteout hatch with him, and as he does this, 1,000 futures dropped away before him as he made his first choice, which suggests that his choices, not his fate, were the cause of his downfall. Furthermore, Pyria's society believes an Animus' soul is literally damaged every time they use their power, which implies evil is an intrinsic fate that's bestowed upon people. However, while Darkstalker does all to prevent this in the literal sense, removing the magic from his body into a scroll and creating a soul reader, he still turns towards the dark futures. At one point, Clearsight thinks if he wasn't so worried about his soul, did that mean there was nothing turning him back? Suggesting that the magic itself doesn't turn dragons evil, but rather what they decide to do with it, thereby dismantling the idea that fate controls everything. Since Sutherland is not a religious author, and as a modern text, Darkstalker was written with no preconceived ideas that the readers would be religious, and because of this, the text is more likely to challenge religious ideas such as believing in fate. This idea of fate is further explored with the discussion of if you can or should try to control the future through Clearsight and Darkstalker's future powers, where they see the same futures but in different ways, so their efforts oppose each other. Darkstalker chooses to aim for more desirable futures and ignores the bad futures, instead deciding to focus on who he is presently. Meanwhile, Clearsight is preoccupied with analysing all the possible paths and feels a responsibility to push Darkstalker down the lighter path. But despite her efforts, she has very little control over her own future until she defeats Darkstalker. As a common convention of fantasy, prophecy is prominent throughout the novel. However, interestingly, the prophecies are not destined to come true, and by assuming Darkstalker's fated to be a certain way and trying to fight that, other characters inadvertently push him towards evil and ironically make those futures come true, such as when the Nightwing Queen sends an assassin after Darkstalker after receiving a prophecy that Darkstalker will kill her, which is what makes Darkstalker decide to kill her. Readers familiar with the series will start the book knowing Darkstalker becomes a villain, and they'll try to look for a clear turning point. However, it's left ambiguous where the point of no return for Darkstalker is, or if it even exists, which epitomizes the novel's idea about the ambiguity of evil and villainy. In conclusion, Sutherland's complex and nuanced exploration of the nature of evil through questioning fate and the manipulation of the narrative perspective, along with a discussion of relevant social issues regarding societal division, war, mass shootings, and family, make Darkstalker a worthy text for the literary canon.